Click on your 3 buttons, which will say start video. You know what? I'll request of it. If you accept my invitation, give me a second.
I gotta remember, I'll need it for tomorrow. There we go.
Okay, let's go. Right, 10B3, bottom right-hand corner. Let's get going. I'm going to spotlight my picture for everyone to see. You can change the setting if you prefer, but on the top right-hand corner, you can change the setting. But here we go. Amr Rabbi Elazar says a new ruling. It's a new beginning for those of us that have been out of things for a little while. Ir Sheruba Roitzchim, a city where the majority of people are murderers. So which means this city has a reputation to have residents living in it, and they are all murderers. Now, this is a city that happens to be a city of refuge. So it was designated as a city of refuge, but the reality is that it's got actually majority of murderers living in that city. So over the page, 10b4, says the Gemara, what's the din about such a city? What's the rule? Eina kriletes. It will not absorb. It will not provide refuge for the accidental killer who needs to run away. Right? This city won't provide that for this person, which means the category falls away. Why? As it says, it's because it says that this killer, it says in the pasuk, this killer will go and will share. It's actually a pasuk from Yehoshua, because we'll see soon that as Yehoshua conquered the land, that's when Hashem reminds him of the instruction of, remember, Moshe Rabbeinu set up the 3 cities of refuge on the east side of the Jordan, and then Yehoshua had to do the rest when he came into Israel. So we find interesting verses, which you'll see the Gemara pulls up on, regarding Yehoshua. So this is one of them. It says that the murderer, the killer, will come to the city of refuge, and he will talk over his story to the elders of the city. Right? The elders being the Beis Din, the Sanhedrin. Okay? And not if his words are the same as their words. Which means if they're all murderers, what's he going to tell them? That I murdered. But the whole point was that there should be a guide and a light. The whole point was that there should be a guide and a light for him. Right? That he's going into a city where there's elders of the community. He can talk to them. They could guide him. Right? That's the role that the Ziknei Ha'ir, the elders will play. If the elders are killers themselves, then that's counterproductive. That doesn't work. There's no point of him telling over his story to murderers. So that's not going to work. That's the psak. That's the first ruling of Rabbi Elazar. A city that has a majority of killers, and I guess I don't know who's going to be the one to actually define that city. Is this a hypothetical case or this a real case? If it's a real case, who's going to be the one to actually define a city as this category? A city that has majority of killers living in the city. Don't know. Not sure. But maybe it's more of a hypothetical case. Is that such a city hypothetically cannot become a city of refuge because there's no positive refuge for this individual. That's the first din. The second din, another din of Rabbi Elazar, is Rabbi Elazar, Ir she'ein bo zkenim. What happens if you have a city that has no Beis Din? Interesting, you have the terminology, right? Zkenim is elders. Now, the truth is you don't necessarily need zkenim, elders, to be the Beis Din. But elders doesn't mean only in years. Elders means in knowledge. So you don't have the elders, you don't have the rabbonim, you don't have the caliber of a Beis Din. Which, by the way, some cities around the world don't have a Beis Din. Especially in Europe, the smaller cities around Europe today don't have a Beis Din. They have to rely on the London Beis Din, right? Or Israel Beis Din. They don't have their own Beis Din. So what happens if you don't have your own Beis Din? Because there's no Dayanim that live there. It's too small of a city for whatever reason.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
But what are these murders doing in the cities of refuge? What are these? I thought it's supposed to be a place for people killed inadvertently. In other words, they're not murderers. It was something that happened, but they didn't intend it to happen. But now you've got murderers who intend on killing people.
So what's happening here is like this. It's a good question. Why? Let me just think through that. How do you have a city that's filled with murderers? Or killers, that is, right? It could be killers.
But these cities are primarily for somebody who killed inadvertently.
My answer would be like this. What happens if, I don't know how simple this is, because remember, all the cities of the Levium became cities of refuge. Right? All the cities of refuge, also all the cities of the Levium became cities of refuge. So not just the 48 cities, not just the 6 cities of Yehoshua and Moshe. More than that, the cities of the Levium all became cities of refuge. So now the question is that what the Gemara is talking about? Is the Gemara saying that Levium could be the murderers that we're referring to? You've got a city filled with murderers, or killers, should we say. I think it's a hypothetical case, but what happens if your city is filled with people who have killed? I guess we're referring to Levium. Or, one second, what happens if a Levi, I can't remember offhand, what happens if a Levi wants to sell his property? The Levi is given property, and the Levi wants to sell 48 cities, I think. 48 cities were given to Levium. What happens if they want to sell their property? I wonder if, again, I'm just thinking out loud here. I wonder if the purchaser anyone can buy the city of Levium and then become killers, murderers who live in that city. I wonder if that's shot, yeah.
These killers who come to the city are those people who have actually fled there.
Maish, your mic is very soft. Say that again.
Are these killers who have arrived at that city, are they people who have actually fled to the city, or are they people who were born and bred in that city?
Very good, very good. So let's explore that. What could have happened is that they ran to the city of the Levium, and many people ran to the city of the Levium. So they're sitting in that city waiting. Either, does that answer the question? Maybe is that the killers have gone to this one city, and the number of killers accumulates. They've got 10, and then 20, and then 30, and then 40 killers sitting around the city. Eventually, the killers' percentage takes over even the regular residents, called them the Levium. Maybe that's an option.
But why are killers running around free? Surely
no, because once they go there, they can live life as they wish.
No difference to South Africa.
once they go there, they can live as they wish. So maybe that's the explanation, Mesh. It could be. Is that the city absorbed so many that it could be. Okay, so let's go back to now. The second case was a city that has no elders. Can't take refuge. Why? Because as the pasuk we just quoted earlier in the previous paragraph, the pasuk said to Yeshua, said that they need to talk to Ziknei Ha'ir. They need to talk to the elders. If there's no elders, then there's no one to talk to, which also may mean there's no mentors for them. In order to, this could be an interesting educational concept. In order to bring in troubled individuals like these killers, you need to have mentors in place for them. You can't expect to change these people's lives and assist them in doing tshuva by not having the right mechanchim and educators that are there. So you need to have the ziknei ha'ir, the elders that are there, to guide them. The leika, and we don't have them.
But didn't they take their teachers with them?
The rule was that wherever they go, their teacher must go with them. Was that said regarding the murder? Was that said regarding the Ori Miklat, or was that said regarding the Tmeim, the impure individuals who sat outside the camp recovering from Tumah? Or the mitzvah? Was that said?
I don't know.
That the Rabbanim go with them? I think we did learn such a thing.
Wasn't there something about the Shiva Bochas to accompany them as well?
Oh, no, that was last week. Last time we learned that 2 Talmidei Chachamim must go along with them on that journey to the city of refuge. That's correct. I think what I was saying is that part of the support that we show someone, I don't know if it's the killer, is that spiritually the Torah teacher must travel along with them so that they don't lose out on learning Torah. I seem to recall that. But I don't know if the Torah teacher lives there with them. I think the Torah teacher arrives there to learn with them, but doesn't necessarily live there. And that could support the point that you need to have in the neighborhood, besides teachers that are coming in, you need to have Ziknei Ha'ir, elders within the city himself. Okay, that's the 2 first laws of Rabbi Elazar. Itmar, we're going to challenge the last one. Irsh Ein Baskenim, a city that has no elders. Of Ami v'Rav Asi, they argue about this. Chad Omer Kuletes. One says that it absorbs, so it does absorb. Chad Omer Eino Kuletes. And one says, we don't know, by the way, who the opinion is. So it's just passed down, and the 2 of them argue this point. One says the city absorbs and is a city of refuge, and the other says, no, it doesn't absorb and it's not a city of refuge. So now we're going to try to explain the 2 opinions. According to opinion, who says that doesn't absorb. Why? Because you need to have the city of refuge. You need to have Ziknei Ha'ir. You need to have the city, the elders, as we said earlier. If there's no elders, then you can't have a city of refuge because you need to have the Ziknei. You need to have the elders who are going to mentor him, guide him, right? But according to opinion who says that it is kolet, it does serve as the city of refuge, what do? So he says, mitzvah ba'alma. It's only just a mitzvah, meaning it's an additional mitzvah to have elders there. But if you don't have elders, is it, I'll use a halachic terminology, is it ma'akev? Is it ma'akev? What does ma'akev mean? Does it hold back the din? So if you don't have elders in the city of refuge, does that now make the city of refuge not a city of refuge? Or do we just say it is a city of refuge, but you're just lacking a mitzvah? You don't have the elders there. Okay, so you don't have the elders. What are you supposed to do? That's the debate, the discussion. Okay, mitzvah ba'almahu. So that's the machlokas. Now, this principle of mitzvah ba'almahu is a critical principle because some things in halacha are ma'akev. Some things in halacha actually stop the mitzvah from being fulfilled. Okay? And some things are not ma'akev, don't stop the process from happening. And it's called mitzvah ba'alma. It's just a mitzvah. What does it mean, just a mitzvah? We can't belittle the mitzvah. But just a mitzvah means that it's a nicety, and it's definitely more than a nicety. It's actually requested. But if you haven't done it, it's also okay. Okay, that's the last answer. So according to one opinion, we are very specific about this. If you don't have the cities of the elders set up in the city of refuge, then it is what it is. But in other words, then it can't be a city of refuge. If you the other opinion says no, it can still be. It's just you're not ticking all the boxes. Just on that note, it just shows you the importance of Ziknei Ha'ir, the importance of a Beis Din. And even if not 100% of the community will endorse the Beis Din for whatever reason, nonetheless, it's important for a city to have a Beis Din or Zkanim, elected or appointed elders to overlook the community.
Was there anything
I'm
like
saying that because we're also quick to criticize the elders. We're also quick to criticize the Beis Din. But at the end of the day, Torah wants there to be a Beis Din or Zkanim or elders that are present.
Was there anything like an itinerant rabbi? One,
Say again?
Was there anything like an itinerant rabbi or a Beis Din? They used to go around like the country rabbi.
Oh, right. Yeah. So I'm not sure, but to the communities, it sounds like you need to have one resident there. And I'm not saying it has to be a base. Yeah. It sounds like you have to have one living there, which definitely sets the tone more than just a visitor coming in. Okay, we're going to see this concept of mitzvah ba'al mahu, that something is just a mitzvah, meaning it's not ma'akev, it doesn't hold back the fulfillment of the mitzvah. We're going to see a few more examples of where we see the same debate. The Irish Ein Bos Kenim, another case about a city, bottom left-hand corner, the case about a city that has no elders. Rav Ami v'Rav Asi. Rav Ami and Rav Asi, by the way, it's the same Rav Ami and Rav Asi. Okay, that's it earlier. One says that a boy from that city, meaning a city without elders, can become defined as a rebellious son. If you look at footnote 43, it defines the rebellious son. A ben sorer or mareh, a wayward and rebellious son, is a boy that just passed the age of 13 who steals money from his parents to indulge in feasting on meat and wine. If he persists in his behavior after being admonished and punished by the court and meets several other conditions, he is executed.
Sure.
Ben sorer mareh. I think the Gemara says that this never happened before, but it's a hypothetical case that could happen. So the first opinion says you would do the Ben Soreh or Moreh there in the city. Chad Omar, top of the right-hand column. And the other one says, Ein nasa bos Ben Soreh or Moreh. You won't ever define or paskin or rule a case of a Ben Soreh or Moreh without having elders or the Beis Din in the city. You can't do it. For the same reason that we mentioned earlier. According to opinion, says that you can't do it. It's the first opinion. It's the second opinion, sorry. But Zikne Iroi, you need to have, it says in the verse regarding the Ben Soreh Moreh, it says that word, Zikne Iroi, you need to have the elders of the city. But Leika, you don't have the elders. So there's no elders there, then you can't do the case of Ben Soreh Moreh. What do you need to do? You need to then send him to another city. So if there is such a child, right, and you can't cater for this child in this city, what would you do? You would send him to another city.
This definition of a rebellious child contradicts what we learn on Pesach.
Of this rebellious child.
How is the fourth son?
Yeah, but so let me just define. This rebellious son has had many, many warnings. It's not just the wicked son who, sits at your table and wants to be part of your family. He's talking about a child that's been warned over and over a few times, and hasn't improved or shown any interest in improving in behavior. It's a very harsh case, right? Because let's say you have a teenager who gets involved in alcohol addiction. So is addicted to wine, because it has to be wine specifically. So he gets addicted to alcohol, starts spending money and stealing money to pay for alcohol. It's very scary. Do you kill the child? Or do you say that there's rachmanis, the child's addicted, left out on the streets, and how can you kill the child for that? Yeah. But this is a child that's being warned and has explicitly told the Beis Din he has no interest in changing. So it's not just that you take a child, and you punish them this way. Okay, so let's go over here. I just want to mention on that note. Okay, one second. So then, no Ben Soreh Mareh. You need to have Zikne Iroi. Yeah, but Leika, you don't have it. we spoke about that you go to a nearby city, right? The man Amar Nasa about Bain, according to the opinion who says that you do the Ben Soreh or Mareh, you do the case of Ben Soreh or Mareh. How come you do it? There's no elders there. What are you going to do? He says, mitzvah ba'alma. As we said earlier, it's just a mitzvah. Meaning it's ideal to have elders, but if you don't have elders, you move on. It's fine. You can still go ahead with the case. That's the terminology, mitzvah ba'alma. It's just a mitzvah. By the way, the funny thing about this mitzvah, this terminology is when you say it's just a mitzvah or it's merely a mitzvah, that indication sounds quite belittling to the mitzvah. It's just a mitzvah. But that's the context. It's an extra detail. If you don't have that extra detail, you still fulfill the mitzvah. On that note, yeah.
You could interpret it two different ways, the way that you say, or that you just can't do it. If you don't have the elders, well, then he sort of gets away with it, so to speak. But it doesn't mean that someone else can sentence him. Who else would sentence him?
So the first opinion holds that, but not this opinion of mitzvah ba'alma. Mitzvah ba'alma holds that you're allowed to put in there. It's just an extra detail. But there is the first opinion says you can put in there even without elders. That's the first opinion. Now, I just want to mention on that note is it's interesting that there are some communities around the world, Rabbonim or communities that won't do Giyur, conversion. For example, if I'm not mistaken, I think in Argentina, which they have Chashuva Rabbonim in Argentina, I think they don't do Giyur, conversion. So certain communities have a tradition. Why? Because it's very tricky and you never know. And it's hours and hours of investment of the community for the sake of the convert. And let's say the community doesn't have the resources to cover such a project of conversion, number one. Or they're not trained enough to cover a process of conversion, right? Or they are nervous of the potential converts that are trying to convert. There can be various reasons why a community decides not to offer, why a community, even with a Beis Din, decides not to offer Giyur as one of its offerings. So what do? You have a Yid living in Argentina that wants to convert. What are you supposed to do? The answer is there's no choice. You got to go to the neighboring country. Maybe in the neighboring country, they would accept you. Maybe by way of referral, your rabbi, your community leader will contact the Beis Din there and say, you do conversions. And we've got a sincere member of our community that would like to convert. Right? And therefore,
that's open to a lot of misuse. People can make a lot of money out of it.
Right, exactly. That has been done. That is done, and that's why you got to be so careful. Is which organization is the one providing the service or the teaching, because it becomes a moneymaker.
Yeah,
sure. You see, in South Africa, our advantage in a way is that the fact that the Beis Din has a conversion process, no one's going to try and offer a second for the sake of money. You won't get away with it. The Israel chief rabbinate, if these people ever want to make Aliyah again, will never manage, because you've established an organization that's well respected internationally, with its pros and its cons, with its weaknesses and its strengths. It's recognized internationally. So therefore, if you haven't gone to that Beis Din, suspicious. Why haven't you gone to a Beis Din? But the moment my community doesn't offer a Beis Din, well, then I have to go looking now for a Beis Din. So that gets a bit more tricky. Okay, that's another example. Let's go to a third example, middle of the column, 10b4. Another case. It's a case of the Egla Arufa. What's the case of the Egla Arufa? So if you look at number 46, it'll tell you the case. If a person is found murdered between two cities and the identity of the murderer is unknown, The elders of the great Sanhedrin must measure the distance to the surrounding cities and determine which city is closest to the corpse. So you're going to measure.
Rabbi, is this also covered in Sota? I think it was covered in Sota.
That's right. That's right. I'm sure it was.
Yeah.
I'll tell you now. Okay, it doesn't bring the footnotes here, but I'm pretty certain it is. Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
If you look at footnote 46, you'll see he refers here to Tractate Sota, chapter 9.
Yeah.
So well done. So what you've just done now, Russell, is cross-referencing Talmudic sources. Is one of the skills of Torah learning, is to be able to compare different sources. That's beautiful. So well done. So if you read this, it says that if a person is found murdered between two cities and the identity of the murderer is unknown, the elders of the great Sanhedrin must measure the distance to the surrounding cities and determine which city is closest to the corpse. Why? Because they should have watched over the mace. They should have watched over this person and protected this person. And the fact that you didn't protect him, you caused or indirectly caused his murder. Afterwards, the basin of that city must then bring a female calf that was never worked with and decapitate it in an untilled valley that has never been worked before. Okay?
Yeah.
If the city has no basin, Meroim differs to whether the city is required to bring and decapitate a calf or not. That's the question. So, by the way, why do we kill this calf? Because we say this acts as an atonement. You killed this man and stopped him from having the legacy of the continuity of life. So that's why you have to bring this calf, kill the calf, take away its longevity as an atonement for what you did to this man. It's a bit of a strange way of atonement. It's one of the chukim, one of the statutes of the Torah. There's no logic here, but that's the process. So let's read inside. The Irish ein boskenim. Rav Ami, Rav Asi, you have a machlokes. Rav Ami, Rav Asi. Chad Amar mevia egla rufa. One says you do bring an egla rufa, that cow. Chad Amar eino mevia egla rufa. You won't bring the egla rufa. The man Amar eino mevia egla rufa. According to the opinion, it says that you don't bring an egla rufa, that you don't bring this calf. But inon we need ziknei ha'irahi. It says in the verse, you need the elders of that city to bring the korban, to bring the sacrifice. And if there's no elders there, then what do? You don't bring the sacrifice. That's the first thing. And there is no elders. If there's no elders, you can't bring the korban. The man Da'amar, according to opinion, says Mevia Egel Rufa. That you do bring the Egel Rufa. Right? So what about the elders? So we say mitzvah ba'alma. It's only a mitzvah. Meaning it's an extra detail to have elders there. If you don't have elders there, you still go ahead and perform it. Okay, mitzvah ba'alma. All right. So that's the third case. So just to summarize, number one was whether the Ir Miklat, the city of refuge, can work or not, with or without elders. Number two, Ben Soreo Moreh, the wayward, rebellious son, can he be defined and sentenced as a Ben Soreo Moreh without elders? Yes or no? And third of all, the Egla Rufa, the same case, three different dinim relating, having a similar scenario to it, similar din to it. All right. Next case. So now we're going into the story of Yeshua more, because we mentioned the verse from Yeshua, because Yeshua was instructed to set up the cities of refuge. So now we're going to unpack a little bit more the story of Yeshua. He says, why is the story of the murderers, inadvertent killers, why is it found in the book of Yeshua? You find it over the page to 11a1. I'm sorry for those of you that have copies. I haven't made the next series of copies yet for page 11. It says the case by Yeshua is said Bilashon Azah. is said in a very, very strong terminology in the story of Yeshua. Where do we see a strong terminology? As it says in the pasuk, and Hashem spoke to Yeshua, to Joshua, saying, because now he's instructing him to build the cities of refuge in Israel. And he says the words daber, that's a key word. Daber el bnei Yisrael, speak to the Jewish people. Lemor saying, Tnu lachem es arei amiklat asher dibarti aleichem. Give for yourselves, designate for yourselves the cities of refuge as I have spoken to you. Now the word is daber. And also look, it's twice. Vayedaber and daber. See that? Vayedaber and daber. So twice it says it. The word daber is quite strong. What could you say instead? Vayomer Hashem. And Hashem said. Vayedaber is known to be a statement of strength. If you look at footnote 1, he explains the term daber, speak, as opposed to emor, say, is always taken as an indication of firmness. Throughout the book of Joshua, the common term used is vayomer Hashem, and Hashem said. Whereas here the expression is vayidaber Hashem. Hashem spoke. The general rule of scriptural interpretation is dibur lashon kasha. Saying is amira lashon kasha. Saying is gentle. Dibur is, and speech is firm. So why is it that the pasuk by Yeshua is speaking in a firm terminology when generally the book of Yeshua is speaking in a more gentle, soft terminology of Vayomer? That's the question that the Gemara asks. And look at the answer. The answer is Mipnei Shehein Shel Torah. Because these words of building the Arei Miklat, building the cities of refuge, are actually the words of Torah.
Is it the same as is it the same in the Chumash? When it says V'yadaber Hashem, it means he's giving them a clap. They're going to get a clap.
So I think it means not necessarily a clap of punishment. It means a set of rules. As Moshe, because most of Moshe's psukim are by Yedaber.
Yeah.
And that's because most of the Torah is actually mitzvahs, instructions. By Yeshua, it's not as harsh or as firm as it would be by Moshe. And maybe because Yeshua is the one implementing, right? The mitzvah is already there. He's just implementing the mitzvah that was told to Moshe. And therefore the terminology by Yeshua is normally by Yomer. Here in this particular case, it's Vayidaber, like it was by Moshe Rabbeinu. And the question is why? So look at footnote number 2. This is the only instance in the book of Yeshua where God instructed Joshua to fulfill the commandments of the Torah. You see? This is the only instance that he says to him, you still have an outstanding mitzvah to fulfill. The mitzvah of the Torah that was said regarding cities of refuge, you haven't yet implemented. And therefore, that's why he uses the word vayidaber to allude to the fact that this is actually a biblical mitzvah. Consequently, it is expressed in a way that indicates firmness. The Torah itself is referred to as Oz. Hashem Oz la'amo yitain, might. As it says, Hashem will give might to his people. That's that. Hashem Oz la'amo yitain. God's other statements to Yeshua, however, do not relate to the Torah commandments, and they are therefore introduced with a soft expression of Amirah, saying. Here's another answer. Alternatively, since this commandment to Yeshua is a continuation of the commandment given Moses to Moshe regarding the designation of the cities of refuge, because it's a continuation, is expressed in terms of speaking, as was the original commandment to Moshe. Furthermore, the exalted nature of the Torah makes it appropriate that its commandments be expressed in more serious terms, denoting a higher stature. Okay, to me this answer seems quite similar to the first answer. And that is, bottom line is, the instruction to Yeshua is to fulfill a mitzvah of the Torah. That's why it's Vayidaber. Okay, that's the statement. That's the quote. That's the statement of Rav Chama bar Chanina, who said that case. Okay, right. The Memra, we see from this discussion, we derive from this discussion the Chol Dibur Lashon Kosher. You're basically indicating, based on your previous paragraph, that every time it says the word Vayidaber, it means strictness, firmness. One second. So that's what you're deducing. You're deducing that dibur means harshness. Says the Gemara, is that true? Sorry, says the Gemara, yes, you're right. Kidich Siv, as it says in the verse, this is regarding the burial of Yaakov Avinu. Okay, so he says, if you look at footnote number 3, this is the statement made by the sons of Jacob after they returned from burying grain in Egypt, where they had been accused of spying. No, so it's not the burial, of spying by the ruler of the land, Joseph, and had been forced to leave their brother Shimon behind as a hostage. When the brothers wished to emphasize to Jacob that the ruler had treated them harshly, they used the word expression diber. Yes, this man spoke harshly to us. Diber ha'ish adonai haaretz, the master of the land, itano kosher. He spoke harsh to us, and because he spoke harsh, so from here we see that the word diber means strength or strictness or firmness. That's the statement of the Gemara. That from here we learn that daber, every time you see the word vayidaber, it means being firm. It means being strict. Baruch atah Adonai Melech haolam. Okay, but we're going to challenge that. The Hatanya, but it says in a different price. It says nidberu. In Malachi, this is quoting a pasuk in Tanakh. Nidberu. It says that they spoke to each other. Those who fear God, nidberu, spoke to each other. So it says, and we have a quote from the Brisa, Ein nidberu elo lashon nachas. Nidberu, not daber or vayidaber. Nidberu, which seems to be the same root, implies pleasantness, speaking mildly, mild speech. And so it says, Yadber amim tachtenu. He shall lead nations under us. Okay? He shall lead nations under us. Look at footnote number 5. The Gemara assumes at this point that since the Hebrew word used for lead, yadber, is from the same root as the word used for speaking, dibur, it should therefore have the same connotation. Now, the leadership of the verse refers to the end of days, when all nations will willingly accept their role as servants of God. So the word dibur should also carry the same meaning. So yadber amim tachtenu, he should lead nations under us. That means Mashiach. So we see that dibur means gentleness. That the nations will accept him in a gentle way, not in a firm way. So we have a contradiction. Is daber firm or is daber gentle? We've got verses on each side supporting this point. Says the Gemara, you're not looking at the precise context or build-up of the word. Daber lechut and yadber lechut. You got to separate daber and yadber. Daber and yadber. Meaning, daber means one thing, and daber means strictness and discipline, and yadber means another thing. Yadber amim tachtenu, or nidberu. That's a different case. It's a different terminology. And therefore, this is how deep Hebrew language is. Within the same word, you've got a word that means strict, you've got the word that means soft, within the same connotation. Fascinating. You have the same word that means strict and the same word that means soft. And by the way, even the person who speaks strictly could also be intending to be soft. You know that in Hebrew you have that also. In modern Hebrew you have that. Maybe it's not modern, maybe biblical Hebrew. what's the Hebrew word for a root in the ground? Shoresh.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Shoresh is a root in the ground. How do you say uproot? Yashresh. To uproot. Same root. Same root, guys. Same root. Excuse the pun.
Yeah.
So shoresh means to plant, and yashresh means to take it out. So here too, yadber means to speak strictly, and daber means to speak strictly, and yadber means to be soft in speech. It's the two sides. I'm not exactly sure why Torah has that, but I think that does feature a number of times in the Hebrew language. Okay, so how do we get onto that? We got onto that because we were speaking about why to Yehoshua was the parsha of the Ir Miklat said to him in very strict terminology. That's why we brought in this discussion about Yadber or Vayomer. Okay, now you'll see here the Gemara at the bottom left-hand column of 11a1 brings simani. Simani means signs. To remember the next three sections, you've got signs. Rabbanan is the first side. Mehemni, and Vesifri. Yeah, okay. Mehimni, it's an interesting one. Mehimni. We'll come back to that once we learn the three cases. Okay, so we'll come back to that point. We have a series of machlokes. Between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbanon regarding Yehoshua and why it was said in a harsh terminology. Well, this is it. We just mentioned why it was said in harsh terminology. So Chad Omer one says Midnei Shishihom. The reason why it was told in harsh terminology was because Yehoshua was delaying. He was taking his time. After they conquered the land, he was taking his time to set out the cities of refuge. That's why he was told strictly to set it up. Top of the right-hand column. Chad Omar one says, because the words of the Ori Miklat, the cities of refuge, are words of Torah. And because they're mitzvahs that we were already given to Moshe earlier, that's why they were repeated over to Yeshua in that same terminology of Vayadaber. So two reasons why, according to this insight, two reasons why Yeshua was spoken to strictly. One, because he was delaying, and the other one, because it was a mitzvah of the Torah and therefore deserved the strong terminology. That's the first machloket that were highlighted. The second machloket, right, it says a completely different topic. Yeshua wrote down these words, B'Sefer Toras Elokim, in the book of the Torah. Yeshua wrote part of the Torah. Now the question is, hold on, wasn't Torah written by Moshe? What does it mean that Yeshua wrote down these words? It's not his right to write down words. Okay? So Pligi Bar, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Nechemia. So here we have a machloket. Again, it's Rabbi Yehuda. We keep on repeating Rabbi Yehuda here. But now it's Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Nechemia. So Rabbi Yehuda and Nechemia argue. Chad Omer one says, Shmoine psukim. It's the last 10 psukim. The last 10 psukim of the Torah were written by Yeshua. How do we know, according to this opinion? Because it actually says that Moshe died. If Moshe died 10 psukim before the end, then who wrote the end? So according to one opinion here, Yeshua wrote the end. The last 10 psukim of the Torah are written by Yeshua. Look at footnote 10. The last 8 verses of Deuteronomy commence with, and Moshe died there. Since the Torah says that Moshe died, someone else, namely Yeshua, must have written those verses. There is a Tanaic view that Moshe did indeed write the last 8 verses of the Torah. The dispute in Al Gemara indeed parallels a dispute concerning this, found in Tractate Baba Basra as well. Okay, so the first opinion says that it was Yehoshua. And let's go back to the Gemara. So one says that the last 8 verses were Yehoshua's verses. One says, Are Miklat. That what actually is that the verse refers to the passage about Ir Miklat that's recorded in Yehoshua. What does that mean? It means that Yehoshua wrote down the city of refuge. He copied down these words in his own sefer, in his own book. Right? So the second opinion says, you know what these words are? The words were the cities of refuge, which the cities of refuge are mentioned in the book of Yehoshua. Not that Yehoshua wrote parts of Torah, according to the second opinion. Yehoshua did not write parts of Torah. Yehoshua wrote the book of Yehoshua. But within the book of Yehoshua, you've also got the instruction about the cities of refuge. Okay, that's their argument. It all fits well according to the first opinion, who says that Yehoshua actually wrote 8 verses of the Torah. This is what it means. It says the word that he wrote it down in the book of the Torah of God. So it means he literally wrote down words in Torah. That's what it means. But according to the opinion who holds that he never wrote down Torah, he never wrote parts of Torah. He just recorded things in his book. And what was he recording? He was talking about Ir Miklat. Says the Gemara, what does this mean? Basefer Torah Selekim. That he wrote it in the book of the Torah of God. What does it mean? He wrote it in the book of the Torah of God. There's no such thing. There's no such verse of Yehoshua in the book of the Torah of God. He didn't write anything in the book of Torah of God. So what does it mean, Basefer, according to this opinion, we're asking? What does it mean that he wrote it down in the book of the Torah of God? So we have one more paragraph here to answer this. Hachik Amar, this is what it means to say. And Yeshua wrote down in his book. You see that we just added in the word. Yeshua wrote down where? In his book, he wrote it down. It's a Dvarim Ma'ela, these words. Hakesuvim, which are written, the Sefer Torah Selekim, which are written elsewhere in the book of Torah. So according to the opinion who says that Yeshua actually never wrote down words of Torah, but he was actually documenting his own book. That's what it means. Yeshua wrote down in his book those words that were written elsewhere within the context of Torah. That's the point. So the second machloket is, did Yeshua actually write in the Torah? Or rather, is the Torah summarizing what Yeshua did in his own text, not in Torah text? That's the second argument. We're going to learn the third argument now. Again, it's Rabbi Yehuda against his colleagues. And let's see here. Sefer Torah, Sefer Shetfore B'Pishtan. A Torah that was sewn together, I think it means the parchments pieces, were sewn together using linen. Pishtan. Okay, let's see. Thinking about Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir, we have a machloket to Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir over the page 11.2. We're going to try to get to the Mishnah tonight. So it says here, Chad Omer kosher. One opinion of Rabbi Yehuda or Rabbi Meir says it's actually kosher. Chad Omer pasul, and one says it's pasul. What's the reason? Why is it possible to tie them with pishtan, with linen? The man Dama pasul, according to opinion, he says it's pasul, as it says in the Torah regarding tefillin. The man Torah Hashem beficha. That the Torah of Hashem should be in your mouth. Okay? The iskis, right? So that the word of Torah, those words regarding Torah, were written in the tefillin. That means there's a common denominator between the Torah and the tefillin, because the tefillin carry the word saying Torah Hashem in it. That shows you that tefillin and Torah share the same law. V'itkish kol haTorah kula l'tefillin. And we're going to compare the whole Torah to tefillin. Because the fact that the tefillin contains within it parshias discussing Torah shows you there's a common denominator, a similarity between Torah and tefillin. Ma tefillin, just like tefillin, halacha l'Moshe Sinai. Tefillin is given to us from Moshe from Sinai. We don't understand it. The Torah from Begidim, it requires us to use sinews, animal skin or animal sinews, not pishton, linen. So just like we have, by the way, how do we know this? How do you know that tefillin must be tied together with sinew? Halacha l'Moshe Sinai. It's tradition. It's tradition. I actually recently got my tefillin checked, and I had an interesting conversation with the sofer who is explaining to me there's a big debate in modern sofrim as to whether you can tie this is not the parshias, this is the bias, whether you can lock the bias, close the bias up again with glue, or should you only use sinews? That's the question. Generally sofrim use glue, by the way, because you can't properly close the bayit unless you use glue. But there is a debate about this because some will say, no, only sinews holds together the tefillin. That's the halacha. They actually debate what's the halacha l'Moshe Sinai. Are you allowed to use glue or not? Or do you have to rely specifically only on sinews? Okay, anyway, bottom line is we have halacha l'Moshe Sinai. We have a rule by tefillin that you can't use linen. You got to use the hide. You got to use sinews. So too, afkol, the Torah from Begidim. So too, the entire Torah must be tied together with Giddim as well with sinews. You can't use linen. That's how do you know? Because you're comparing Torah and tefillin. So just like tefillin has this requirement, so says Moshe, so too Torah has the requirements as a result of the comparison. The idach. What about the other opinion? What about the opinion who says that it's actually kosher even when there's no sinews? What about the opinion who says it's kosher if you use linen? So he says, Ki itkash, when do you compare Torah and tefillin together and start making comparisons? Lemutar beficha. Only to teach us that it must be written on parchment that is made from the skin of an animal that is permissible to be eaten. That too is another condition. It's got to be an animal that you can eat from, i.e. a kosher animal. The comparison teaches us that skin of unclean animals may be used neither to produce parchment for Torah scrolls nor for tefillin. That's how we know. So the comparison is just for the type of parchment you're using. It's got to be a parchment that's edible, according to halacha. However, the hilchosav regarding the other laws, all other laws of comparison, lo itkish, it's not compared. We won't compare Torah to tefillin. And therefore, even though tefillin has to be done by sinews, closed by sinews, Torah, on the other hand, according to this opinion, won't need to. Because we don't compare the two. And therefore, Torah could be tied together by linen. So that's the debate. Do we compare it entirely to tefillin, or do we only compare it partially to tefillin? And therefore, the tefillin could be tied together by linen itself. Here's the halacha. Amarav, Chazin and Luhu, we saw the tefillin de Bei Chabibi, and the tefillin of my uncle, Bei Chabibi. It's interesting terminology for an uncle. It was a b'chia, the tefiri bekitna. He sewed it with linen. But the halacha is not like him. You can't use linen. You got to use sinews.
Is sinew sticky?
Is it sticky?
No, it's like a thread.
It becomes a thread, right? It becomes a thread.
So you mean they would sew it to the base?
Yeah, so if you look at your tefillin, you'll see it. Look tomorrow in your tefillin and you'll see how the base of the bayit, because here we're not talking about the bottom. Here we're talking about the actual parchment. That's, maybe the bayit too.
Yeah, because if you're sealing it, you're sealing the
bias, right? In the tefillin, you're actually not sealing, right? In the tefillin, you're not connecting parshas in the tefillin. You're tying batim. So if you look at the back of your bias, you'll notice a white thread that's locked down your bias. That white thread, it actually sticks out from the top. Also, on top of the rosh, you'll see the white strands. That's sinews. It's animal sinews that tie it together. That's why I told you about the debate whether you add in glue or you don't add in glue. It's part of the conversation. But then that's where you see the white thread. And then when you tie together the parshias, the parchment pages of a Torah, they're also connected using that white sinew too. So
yeah, you can see the stitching.
Exactly. That's that. Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Look at 17. We'll end with this. 17. Ritva objects this reading of the Gemara. He maintains that everyone agrees that tefillin must be sewn with sinews, not with linen, since that is the incontrovertible. Okay. Oral law. That means halacha Moshe Sinai. You can't debate it. Transmitted to Moshe at Sinai. The controversy regarding linen or sinew involves only a Torah scroll. So in other words, he doesn't believe that the house of Abchia had tefillin that was sewn with linen. That's what the Ritva says. Impossible. He did not have tefillin sewn with linen because nobody holds that tefillin is allowed to have linen. Good point. Hence, Abchia certainly would not have had tefillin sewn with linen. So the wording doesn't make sense. Therefore, the Ritva favors the reading. He reads it as follows. Chazina lesifrei debei chavivi. I saw that the Sforim, the Torah scrolls of the house of my uncle, didn't have it in. So we changed the wording. I noticed that my uncle didn't have his Torahs connected with sinews. And what does the Gemara say? Halacha is not like that. We are particular, both with tefillin as well as Torah, to use specifically the sinews that are linked to this. And so that sums up the three machloket, three different sections dealing with the machloket of Rabbi Yehuda versus his contemporaries. Okay, we'll stop here on this one.